Good day, and welcome to yet another timely and relevant webinar focused on engineering performance excellence. I'm joined today by Jared Frederici. He's been a frequent speaker in our series over the past 5 years. Always look forward to hearing Jared's perspectives and points of view on topics. Today, the focus is on, quote, the new industrial engineering, in particular talking about how we can do a better job perhaps as a profession in terms of extending and expanding contributions and impact of I&ISE in our organizations. James Swisher is also joined us today. James is in charge of continuing professional education and development, and so we appreciate James' support and his attendance today. Thank you, James. I wanted to start off by just providing just a little bit of context. This series has been focused on, over the last 5 years, been focused on performance excellence and in the context of integrated systems engineering, and lots of ways to sort of define the scope and the domain of industrial and systems engineering. I&ISE has published a body of knowledge document. There's 14 sort of domains. This list of things here tends to be the subdomains that we've been focusing on in our webinar series over the past 5 years. And again, the focus has been on how do we do a better job as industrial and systems engineers, helping organizations integrate strategy, technology, process, and people. Back in the 90s, I can recall reading this article when it first came out in MIT Sloan Management Review. This article was actually reprinted recently, in fact, this year. And this is a copy of the screenshot of the reprint that was done. The focus of the article by Thomas Davenport and James Short was on, quote, the new industrial engineering. Again, keep in mind, this was 1990, and the focus was on information technology and business process redesign. Keep in mind that 1990 was back when Texas Instruments was doing business process reengineering. That was a big fad, a big topic. And sort of the distinction between continuous improvement and step function, big improvements, big step S-shaped curve improvements. Notice that Thomas Davenport is still writing articles. This is from the magazine Sloan Management Review in 2025, and that second article there is by Thomas. So he's continuing to be productive and a thought leader. Most recently, interestingly, last week, Waldemar Kurowski from University of Central Florida did a presentation with the Industrial Advisory Board, and it was a summary of an article that I've screenshot here for you, focused on grand challenges in industrial and systems engineering. This is the title slide from the presentation that was provided last week. Wonderful presentation, great article. I'm going to say this a little more academically oriented. I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean it to contrast what I think Jared's going to present to us today, which is a little more of a practitioner view, reduction to practice view of where industrial engineering is and where it's headed. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Jared. And Jared, once again, thank you for taking time from a busy schedule to do this. Really looking forward to your sharings today.
Oh, no problem, Scott. Thanks. Nice to be here. Nice to be here again. So I'm going to take control here of the slides and get started. But I'm Jared Frederici. So I've been here with the Poirier Group about 14 years and have looked after a number of different roles. But as a result of doing 500-600 projects in 20 different industries, some big, small, medium, lower mid-market private equity, we get exposed to a lot of companies and a lot of deployments of industrial engineers or industrial engineering entities within that are called by different names, have different levels of effectiveness. And as we start to head into having information available at our fingertips so readily, things seem to be changing. And so I wanted to share a perspective, at least from what we're seeing, what I'm seeing in industry about the deployment of our practice in industry, and it extends a little bit over um, to academic as well. We're calling it the new industrial engineering. I wanted to challenge some thoughts and opinions and share some things we're seeing that are working, some things that may not be working, um, to get you all challenged up here on Thursday. So uh, again, we're once the architects of factories. So I think now what we're seeing is a mandate to integrate enterprises. So today, really want to talk about a shift and a pivot in our profession from optimizing individual processes to integrating information as rapidly as possible. Uh, on the notion of being T-shaped, so being both broad and deep, how deep do we need to go? I think as we're starting to see information becomes so readily available so quickly, being an orchestrator of this expertise and being able to integrate those entities rapidly per unit time seems to be more pressing than being deep um, in any one given field. And that applies, I think, primarily to deployments enterprise, and there's certainly room for depth. But these are some of the trends that we're seeing in organizations regarding what they need quickly, especially in lower maturity levels. On the academic side, dynamic adaptive learning tracks that cater and specialize in integrating new ways to learn or new ways to code or new ways to synthesize information quickly. Uh, Cost-cutting mandates, while they're there, tend to be hidden with root causes, typically around us being that strategic deployment architect within the organization, where cost is certainly one dimension or one part of the balance sheet and P&L, but we've got to look at maybe 10 dimensions at once in parallel. And finally, being able to connect the dots enterprise-wide as connectors versus isolated or uh, individual departmental efforts, say enterprise collectives. So why are we seeing this? Well, I think post-COVID, generative AI, we have an AI product that works for our organization that we've started to deploy for other companies. And the per unit time ability of getting information, the lead time of getting to root cause continues to be truncated more and more and more. So the value proposition of a group that's going to spend months and months collecting data, building measurement systems, uh, doing regression analysis and getting to confirmatory data analysis, that value prop is going to dwindle, as people are able to build Python code in ChatGPT in a simple Azure database and integrate their machine system um, or their SCADA system into that in real time with a couple APIs and get access to uh, create automatic generative AI pattern recognition algorithms that can detect process failures before we even can build the measurement system. So as we start to see these shifts, I think we're starting to see a shift perhaps in the way the profession needs to equip us and the way we need to be deployed in our organizations to adapt. So the why of this is we showed this abstraction a couple of times. It's the value prop at the left-hand side, the time on the right-hand side of the x-axis. And our goal as industrial engineers and process optimizers and operational analysts is to reduce the latency of an event to fixing the root cause to drive some business KPI. And so um, are we equipped? Our organization is equipped right now to use industrial engineers effectively? Are our universities equipped to teach students how to do that and reduce that lead time? Not sure. So we're seeing some some broken systems out there, and that's the point of today. That's what we want to share. So another big why on this is, we've done a number of projects, a number of industries, and we do track, this is a CMMI variant on maturity taxonomy. And we look at the maturity of organizations, and we work to define a number numerically of what that maturity is based on processes. And we're seeing most organizations somewhere in the defined or understood. We would actually come out around the 2.3 out of 6 here. And so that means, we've got some processes mapped, we've got some SOPs, but we don't necessarily have, we might have some ad hoc continuous improvement, but we don't have a sustainable mechanism by which continuous improvement exists on a day-to-day basis. What we're starting to see is we're starting to see pockets of maturity level 5 and 6 pop up, sometimes starting in our IT departments or in our finance departments. We're starting to see departmental value chains rapidly and exponentially rise as they get equipped with basic financial analysts doing Power Automate workflows or automations at the plant floor within maintenance. We're starting to see 5 and 6 happen pretty frequently, maybe not even driven by our internal IE groups or our internal consulting groups or internal continuous improvement groups. They're just getting access to data, to tools, because the cost is not prohibitive anymore in many cases. And so it's happening already, it's being deployed. So that 2.3 is starting to rise, although some cases we've got fancy tools, we don't have the basics done. So I think, what does that mean for us? Well, do we have the skills as a profession to adapt? What are we learning in our universities? How are we deploying our IE groups within enterprises to be effective? So I think that's the second big why on why we might need to be rethinking things here. So I'll go through the 5 key points here around what pivots I think are required. The first one, and we'll go into some examples. First one is really around, how do we get out of physical workflows to, digital twins in the digital process space. I think we've got so much access to information and data now. Being able to deploy a SCADA system, IoT device, a machine network with great integrators. It's not a 6-month endeavor. A lot of organizations are standing these up in 2 or 3 weeks now, or creating smart nodes that can capture information off devices really quickly. How do we move to finding signals, integrating systems, and integrating information quickly versus creating 2-dimensional measurement systems and collecting data on the plant floor, doing time and motion studies. Now, there's a time and place for that, but as we say, organizations mature, I think we've got to make sure our skills in the deployment of these tools also mature. How do we orchestrate subject matter expertise across the business or across the profession? So again, I think the mandate we're seeing is that people need to be T-shaped, broad and deep, but then they need to be integrators. So how do we want to use our time and our knowledge base? Is it going deep on any one thing, or is it going a little broader on a lot of things, so that when the business comes to us, while we may not know the specific algorithm required to solve this particular problem, we know the right person for it or the right tool, or we even know how to interpret the need to send that over to the right person in the business. So having a broad knowledge, having hundreds of tools, hundreds of tech capabilities. I know it's master of none type mentality, but we're starting to see the value proposition of these groups being the connectors. And with AI, we're just finding that sort of democratizing access to technical knowledge so easy right now and so vast that it seems to be changing the way, as consultants, as industrial engineers, we do our jobs. On the university side, still see static curriculum, still see um, static learning tracks, or maybe an operational analytics deployment, maybe a computer science class here and there, or maybe we're starting to learn a little bit of Python. But the rate by which we're seeing universities adapt to the growing need to be integrators, especially in the context of AI, seems to be slower than what's required by our uh, first, second, third years in industry and what our IE groups or internal consulting groups require in industry. And so are we giving them real-time adaptability? Are we giving them real-time tools? Are we giving them even access to what the ecosystem looks like tool-wise? Uh, you've got to have the core, certainly believe that, but at what point in time can branches of this exist to give people access to what the entire landscape looks like and let them go get curious, search, learn, or find classes that teach a variety of different tools, um, especially those that have real world applications in industry that are based on what organizations are trying to solve. Um, yeah, we've got groups that focus on the P&L, on operating cost reductions, but we're starting to see, how do we drive revenue? What metrics do we need on revenue? How do we, especially right now, address working capital and cash flow? For those private equity-based organizations, how do we make sure that we're paying particular attention with the cost of debt to cash flow? So inventory turns, looking and being masters of finance in some cases, going on to ChatGPT and learning about um, the detailed GL codes that would comprise uh, a certain department that would help us understand how cash is flowing into bank accounts and how international is having access to that information and knowledge pretty quickly so that we could be more strategic in how we architect solutions across the different needs, which include marketing and sales and finance and strategy and information systems, more than just the plant floor, more than just the manufacturing side, more than just the process side. Finally, enterprise connector versus a silo of a operating unit that we can give a hopper of projects to and they'll go solve it. Being able to take orthogonal or cross-dimensional initiatives and connect them and to uh, instead of being the IE group being an enterprise-wide asset that's flexible, that just gets things done per unit time faster than connects faster than anybody else. And I think that that's what we're starting to see the effective groups do in industry. Scott, any before I move into the current landscape, any comments, questions from your side on that?
I think, Jared, I want to unmute myself there. I think the one thing that I would reinforce is we've been doing a number of webinars of recent with Alan Grant, and the focus has been on engineering, people, and team performance excellence. And when you talk about cross-enterprise integration, a number of industrial engineers have been and are a part of big, what I would call big OpEx deployments. Deployments that operational excellence deployments or business process improvement deployments that literally do focus very much so on cross-functional optimization, cutting across the silos. And so the theme, the focus of the work that we've been doing, in fact, I&ISE has just created a new community that's focused on just that people dimension. And what I'm finding is that, and this is just an example of what you said about integration, is that finding ways for industrial and systems engineers to become competent participants and collaborators with the human resource function is just one example of where a silo that, in my opinion, tends to be lagging. When you think about, when you think about professional development in organizations, it's a tangled web of things that happen, not very well architected and not very well executed. And so I think industrial engineers can make a huge contribution in terms of finding ways to create an all-in, so to speak, an all-in culture. So I think that's just one example, Jared, of where following the kinds of things that you're talking about can have a big impact on enterprise optimization.
Yeah, well said. We see that as well. And sometimes it starts small. Sometimes they have to see an entity make some real progress in one department and create some energy and create some wins and see a positive ROI and then expand and then expand. And we can talk a little bit about some of those strategies where if you feel like your department's stuck or we're still siloed, how do you elevate? How do you understand the mechanics of the enterprise to be able to make more of a dent in some of those areas? And I think HR and people and culture is also often underlooked. We're like, the HR people will take care of that on the people side. And in many cases, they can be our just absolute best ally and certainly an enabler on the magnitude of change that we end up doing in our organizations. Yeah, well said. I think many of you already see this, but we see 5-year cycles, and many of you have been a part of those, which is right now we're in one. Things are hard, cash flow's tight. There's a lot of uncertainty, and so the entities that consulting firm comes in or CFO looks at the P&L and looks at our operating expenses and sees mission critical, who's touching the product or service, and strategy, PMO, industrial engineering, continuous improvement, those tend to be on the chopping block. And then things get sometimes worse, and they realize that they need an entity like this to go in and fix all of the brokenness there. Or sometimes things are really good and they want to make another strategic investment to make things better. But we do see many deployments of IE groups or internal consulting groups with IEs in them on this cycle. And so a lot of times they start or they end in manufacturing or engineering or ops. A lot of times there's a lot of buzzwords, there's a lot of language around Lean Six Sigma. I think on the process side, it's process first, maybe system later, or maybe integration or cross-departmental later. A lot of times on the academic side, we're heavy on stats, maybe a little less so on integrating tools and building rapid systems or integrating systems. So I think that we still, and while this is changing, and I think this it will adapt or it'll adapt for us. And in some cases we are adapting, but I think this is often what we see people stuck in. And I think if you're seeing this,
I think
it's not good.
I think I would add to that last slide, Jared. I made this. So I'm a member of the Council on Industrial and Systems Engineers, and it's a group of senior leaders of the industrial engineering function in companies like Boeing and John Deere and GM and UPS and some healthcare companies, Disney, and all of those organizations that I mentioned have fairly well-established industrial engineering functions. And you say IEs are stuck, IE departments, the function of industrial engineering can get stuck. And one of the most common conversations that we meet physically twice a year. We'll be meeting in Atlanta in early June. One of the most common or frequent conversations we have is around how are you positioning industrial engineering in your organization? How can we improve how we position industrial engineering in our organization? How do we get unstuck? We've got this stereotype, IEs do this. how do I get people to understand that the footprint of industrial engineering can be much bigger, and if it is, it has the potential big big upside for enterprise optimization. So this is an important slide. It doesn't just happen to individuals; it happens to the function of industrial engineering in organizations too.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Scott. We see it at the individual contributor, at the department, or at the division or value chain level. We see that notion of getting typecast. So it's really challenging for us too. We're an organization that we get called in, hey, we need 2 million in EBITDA ASAP. Where are you going to cut it? Where are we going to find it in the process? And we do that, and we get good at it, and then we get typecast, and a need comes up within HR because the integrator with their I&ISE has failed, and they don't know, their people aren't adopting it. The tech is lagging, but might be good. And the process, who can I call on to integrate people, process, technology? And we certainly would want our hand up. But as you get really good at something, in some cases, you get typecast. Any great actor, actress might feel that way. And so how do you introduce language into your dialogue that lets them know you're integrators, you're not just great at one thing? And so I think that's a phenomenon that we see as an organization as well, that we have to tackle. And so on that, on the hiring, so because of that 4 to 5 year trend, it's really, really tough, especially as people enter into year 3 in highly political or highly in large organizations where they can start to see the writing on the wall. And that creates a bit of a cycle of attrition, and it can be hard to get great talent because they move in cycles rather than individual peaks or valleys. Uh, Sometimes we're in CI groups standalone that report into the CEO or president. Sometimes and many times, cycle into ops. Some cases, they're in IT. And I've found that can sometimes be fantastic or sometimes be just absolutely terrible. I've seen it in finance and almost and that can rotate. Every 5 years, you might pop over to finance, then to ops or maybe they may not have a COO this year. So now we're going to go directly to the CEO and we're going to have a different type of reporting, but we tend to get shifted around a lot. And some of that comes from being typecast or being misunderstood. Sometimes it comes from not communicating effectively as a CI leadership group what the value proposition is, or maybe it's hoppering. It's as you take on your portfolio, you're only taking on certain types of initiatives to drive ROI. Yes, you've got to drive ROI, but is there a marketing? Have we ever knocked on the door of somebody in marketing and said, hey, I got a measurement system idea for you on a new measure on customer difficulty score, and moving away from CSAT? Have we had those conversations so that we can a bit of self-promotion here and say, hey, we got skill sets that cross ops that can go into different areas to solve complex challenges for you. So I think these are some of the deployment challenges you might be feeling, we certainly see. And sometimes that's as a result of where we're placed on the org chart. And we kind of talked a little bit about that pros and cons rolling into IT, finance, ops, direct into CEO or the board. Many of you have been a part of groups that have reported into different senior stakeholders, and that dramatically changes the way these groups operate. It changes the way they report out. It changes the way they communicate and go to market within their internal customers. And so in some cases, your leader within CI, how they adapt to their placement in the organization ends up becoming a bigger variable than the work itself. And I know many of you feel that, and that's in some cases becomes highly political. And that's why, yes, we got to be good at mapping processes, doing time studies, and cutting out costs on the floor and integrating systems. But at the same time, I think we have a responsibility to understand complex organizational design, enterprise dynamics, enterprise politics, and make sure we position our organizations effectively to not get typecast or to be able to roll with the punches as we get moved every 5 years or so. Or stop the process entirely and show such dramatic enterprise impact that the group reports directly into the CEO and they become a branch of strategy deployment. I mean, that's ultimately one of the highest maturity uh, ways an IE group or whatever you want to call it, reporting into the CEO connected to the strategy of the organization and deploying strategy dynamically independent of the department is one of the highest maturity models or highest aims, I think, for a group like this who can integrate and don't have to necessarily have a big team to do that. And
And
those
that's
groups that tend to do that
yeah,
are the most effective we're seeing.
yeah, and that's a great point, Jared. This is a great slide, and that's exactly what I've seen in my 15 years being part of CISE. When you look at the Boeings, the Disneys, the UPSs, the Deeres of the world, that's exactly what you see. You see that they have been positioned structurally. They've been positioned to have a broad footprint. Now, that doesn't mean that the John Deeres and the Disneys and the GMs, particularly GM. I know we've had lots of conversation with GM. Don't see room for improvement, but I think you're exactly right. At UPS, industrial engineering plays a major role in supply chain strategies, and so I think your point's well taken. That's exactly what I've seen in terms of the approach to deploying industrial engineering at some of the CISE companies. Thanks, Jared.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes you just get the right CEO. Sometimes you get a CEO who doesn't even know what industrial engineering is. And so so the way that you brand yourself and communicate the value prop or the way that it's communicated on your behalf or the cycle that they're in or the types of challenges that they're in. Sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you can create your own luck in that way. So we've talked a little bit about some of the symptoms of current state, and I think that the pivot is required, and organizations will do this to us if we don't do it ourselves as we reposition and rebrand ourselves as integrators, enterprise integrators versus isolated departments. And don't get me wrong, we need to, in many cases, do just a great job in one department, especially if we're building a CI team right now. We're a rented continuous improvement team. A lot of times our consulting firm will, hey, you don't have a CI entity, you don't have a PMO, a strategy group, you don't have an IE group, just rent one. We get 5 or 6 people, we'll go knock out 10 projects, we'll save a bunch of money and create a great ROI, and then we'll hire your full-time resources. We'll hire some black belts, we'll hire a VP of continuous improvement, a senior industrial engineer, and then we'll leave. That's one of our value props. So we do that quite a bit. When you're first starting out, you do need to pick a couple things and do them really well. So don't get me wrong that your first step is to go make a minimal impact in 12 different areas. Sometimes you do need to make a huge impact in one and then take some of that momentum and start to branch across. So I think there's some strategies in how you deploy CI or industrial engineering entities, depending on the life cycle, how many years you've been doing this, what your hopper looks like, what your hoppering process looks like. But I do see that as we get over 2, 3, 4 years and we start to get typecast into one area, I'm starting to see a shelf life on that as low-hanging fruit goes away, entitlement goes up, access to information and integrated information goes up, the value prop starts to diminish a bit. And then they're just looking at the P&L, wondering what these costs are and what the value is for that. If we're not at cause or if we're not creating that value prop for ourselves. We talked about that 5-year hiring list. And so it can be really frustrating, as many of you see, because you want to get great talent into your organization's great IEs. But you've, in some cases, really got to pick the right moment in that cycle. And in some cases, the cost of attrition right now, there are a lot of calculators out there, but it can be 1.5 to 2 times the individual salary of an industrial engineer. In some cases, 3 to 5x, especially if you're losing them within the first 3 years or so. So it's in some cases really difficult to understand what our organizations want. Sometimes they don't even know what they want, and we have to articulate that for them, versus being disposable resources that come and go as business needs come and go. I think we've got to be responsible for creating that value prop versus inheriting what a senior leader wants and then making a PowerPoint to try and articulate uh, what they've said they wanted. And I think, on the IE side, and as we teach our young folks, how do we start to incorporate database, API, AI literacy, including governance, including ethics, including legal dimensions within some of our school systems. And some are, don't get me wrong, but many, many still aren't or don't even have that as an option. Um, in some cases, the notion of a digital twin isn't even coming up in the curriculum these days, and it should. The notion of IoT devices and how databases are structured or what the cloud even is. In some cases, we don't see that pop up. And while we might not believe that to be an IE, that might be a CSE or another, can we not draw upon some of those other departments and get some co-learning? Can we integrate ourselves departmentally? Because just how broad the learning base has become, I think is starting to challenge the model of the depth that we still require to graduate. So I think that's one of those organizations and universities and learning entities that can figure that out quickly, I think are going to be um, the most helpful for our students. We're also not seeing really any emphasis on, if you go back to some of these root causes, it's, we're often reactive. We're often victims, or we would say at effect. We've got a leader in your industrial engineering group who we just have a tough CFO and they don't get what we're trying to do. They only want to see cost reductions. And we tend to inherit, we don't know how to maneuver politically. We don't know how to articulate value propositions. We don't know how to tell stories about the work we've done. We don't know how to communicate the great work that we've done to other departments and start to create a bit of a buzz. And as a result, we're victims. And so I think, how do we start to teach some of those skills at the university level to tell stories, to communicate effectively? I think the underemphasis of that is taking a toll in some of the young folks that we see who might be technically inclined but can't articulate out of a hat what the value is. And so I think we've got to put some pressure on AI, data literacy, storytelling, influence, political acumen, and integration of tech fluency into our curriculums to better adapt to what we need. So I think, this could be a multiple part series. I think that this is going to adapt. And what's the future? What do we need? I mean, in a year and 6 months, it could feel a lot different. But I think that what we're seeing is operating as the internal consulting entity or the strategic deployment entity, and the system strategist tends to be a better articulation of our value proposition versus the sole IE or the efficiency person or the cost cutting person. SWAT teams or value accelerators seem to be more sustaining words. The organizations that are fluent in data tech, sometimes that reside in IT, tend to be really, really well equipped to handle complex challenges and then integrate technology seamlessly. Your IE group's relationship with technology becomes really, really important. If you can get things done quick, you become the go-to team. If you can't, you end up making your own stuff, your own macros, your own tools, and a lot of times for 6 months that works, but then they don't work. And, have you ever, as an IE group, built a bunch of tools because, you're on SAP and you couldn't get a change request through for 6 months, and you end up becoming tech support as an IE group. And I think many of us have seen that. So how do you create cross-departmental relationships with your senior leaders to be effective? How do you get a seat at the table? Are you even aware of the strategy of the organization and how we can deploy initiatives connected to that? How do you do portfolio optimization and hoppering? These things become critical in the modern IE groups that are spread across organizations. And my challenge is that, if you're a bit on the left-hand side, how do we get on the right-hand side, even maneuvering our organizations and communicating the way we create value? And now many organizations are not structured this way, but many are. And that center of excellence as a strategic IE unit, and language is key. Scott, a number of people, Scott included, have said every transformation begins with an assault on language. So we have to be careful. There's trauma in words, especially organizational trauma. There's scar tissue. In many cases, we're not even allowed to use the word efficiency in some of our organizations because, we would see that as reducing the cycle time of a process step. In many cases, it's people are laid off. In some cases, lean or Six Sigma are buzzwords that we're not even allowed to use, or the word consultant isn't even allowed to be used. So you have to have and pay particular attention to language and words because it's the first thing a lot of people hear and see, especially as you're creating an industrial engineering unit or beginning to rethink how we deploy our IEs. Sometimes we've got a PMO entity, but the PMO becomes where the IEs sit and they end up doing projects, but also managing Gantt charts. And so figuring out the language is critical. Once you do that, you're going to have the ability to touch a lot of different departments as a center of excellence, COE. In many cases, that has a reporting structure into either ops or the CEO, or has some lens into finance and certainly strategy. And in terms of ownership, I think we're starting to see the decentralization theme and the deployment effective. It can feel a little weird at first, and it can feel like you've got rogue IEs who are creating value in different departments. And the first 6 to 8 months of that can often feel quiet and weird, and we're not sure what's going on. But a COE that is connected with some dotted lines, that makes cross-departmental contributions and can communicate those wins, and then have a seat at the table across departments and talk about what we're learning, and then start to make an impact without a bias of, a lot of times an IE group that, or a COE that rolls into finance, is going to tend to be working on finance projects. And if they roll into technology, of course, they're going to be helping with tech projects. So that's the challenge when you put a group in manufacturing or you put a group in ops, is they tend to, the leader of that group tends to realize, oh, these guys got great skill sets. They're pretty effective. I'm going to have them work on pet projects specifically within ops to make myself look good to the board. And so how do we change that so that there's not one owner, that it's shared ownership, almost deployed and allocated effectively? If you can nail that allocation and be embedded as transformation agents or strategy deployment agents, but still get that group together in a collective, we're starting to see that system function really, really well and have some longevity to it versus an isolated department that works on some interdepartmental things, some local things. One of the concepts about this is also portfolio management. So you can have the right structure, the right team, the right culture, the right people, and the right skills. And you can choose a portfolio that just doesn't match the business need, that doesn't match what organizations need. and it can really backfire on you. How you do portfolio management and hoppering becomes so critical these days. Lots you take on the wrong portfolio and you could save millions of dollars, but cost cutting is not what's connected to the highest good of the organization. Um, so I like the notion of IEs sort of feeling like hedge fund managers in a sense. And we've seen this, we do a lot of work within private equity, VC, and hedge funds. And it's interesting the way that they buy companies and the way that they select companies and the way that they do their discounted cash flows and simulations and forecasts, figure out how profitable a company is. But it's interesting to see how they play off different industries and how they'll buy something in two completely different industries, but share shared services between the two to find some synergies. Um, and their level of financial engineering and acumen is so high that they can often combine entities seamlessly. And I just wonder how much of that is applicable to what we do when we choose portfolios, when we work on 20 projects or 30 or 100 as an IE group, and you've got 100 different business cases that overlap. How do we, not every single one of those is going to hit cash flow timing. The efficacy of those cash flows is not going to hit like we thought it was. And some of them are going to hit and maybe double, and some of them were conservative. How do we manage the portfolio of project work as fund managers and hedge and have different departments impacted with, if we put all our eggs in one basket and attempt to cut costs across a couple departments versus doing 12 different projects where one impacts revenue and one impacts cash flow and one impacts cost and one impacts the cost of materials and one impacts this, and we've got a few that impact this, how you choose that, how you scale it beyond a single KPI, how you get multiple business leaders backing those and integrated into it. We're starting to see that those CI leaders that really nail the hoppering process and treat their portfolio of projects in their hopper as hedge fund managers, and then articulate that value prop of the hopper, um, starting to define success and starting to be more scalable, allow them to do more things within their IE group. So like that portfolio management, looking at, our quick wins, our low hanging fruit, or sometimes strategic investment, and then sometimes our junk bonds, or the things we have to do, or sometimes we got to do something because we really need to win over the IT person. And that's going to pay dividends. But on the portfolio side, it's probably going to be a lower right. So how you choose that and the tools that you use to choose that start to become critical. And I thought that was really interesting. We're seeing that right now in a couple of projects on hoppering, international global CI hoppering processes, and how you choose the right projects is starting to become one of the biggest variables of the success of those units. Uh, I think that on the curriculum side, maybe for another day, I really wanted to just focus on um, where I think we're headed, where I think our skill sets are needed, how our skill sets have to change. And I think this slide here on, if you can really nail this, if you can really sit at the nexus of ops, strategy, IT, and have the various tool sets to be able to integrate effectively these departments, those that can do this well, I think will start to redefine how IE groups are placed or how we can matriculate through the organization effectively.
Yeah. And Jared, one thing I'd say on this is I talked about the I&ISE body of knowledge, that document or framework that I&ISE put together. And then also that work that the article that was recently published on sort of where industrial engineering is headed, the tool set that you mentioned is orthogonal to this. And so I think one of the challenges we face is that the academic world tends to think about the tool set. What are the tools? What are the technologies that we're providing to our students so that they can go out And from a practitioner perspective, we're more interested in what diseases does the organization have, what diseases are retreating, what opportunities do we have. We sort of assume that the industrial and systems engineer is going to be able to match make. In other words, bring the right tools, the right set of tools to the problem, the focal problem. And so I think that would be sort of a neat slide to look at, or a concept to look at, is slide 30, is what's this orthogonality look like, as we become more the bridge, the integrator, again, the integrated systems engineer. um, how do we ensure that we're applying the right tools in the right way to accelerate benefits realization? I think that's really what you've been saying over the last couple of slides. So, the ROI thing, the ROI portfolio, is how to the real objective function for industrial engineers today, I think, is learning how to accelerate benefits realization for organizations. And when somebody brought up, all the stuff that's happening with DOGE and the federal government right now, yeah, I think that a lot of us look at it and say, the intentions are right. There's a lot of inefficiency, and we need to take that out. But then I think the industrial and systems engineers can also bring, how do we take that inefficiency out in a way that's consistent with the culture of the organization? How do we make sure that we're approaching the reduction of costs in a way that doesn't create more adverse consequences than it does benefits? That's, I think, what's at risk right now with what we're experiencing in the federal government. And somebody mentioned that that's starting to trickle down, and we're starting to see states do the same thing. I hope the states have industrial engineers guiding that effort, and we do it better than we're doing it at the federal government level right now.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And I think in some cases, you all, yeah, Jared talked through some fancy slides, great ideas, but you're living in a dream world because, I got a mandate to hit this KPI by this year, or, it doesn't look good. So I think in some cases you inherit a mandate. But that doesn't mean you can't exercise creativity in the portfolio and, reach out to your marketing folks, your HR folks, say, I got a new way of thinking about customer sat. I got a new way of thinking about how you integrate your HRIS. I got a new way of thinking about this. I think we can apply some pattern recognition on the sales side to simulate and determine root cause of why we're losing some sales. I mean, do you even speak that language? Do you even know how to do that? Do you know that you can have ChatGPT write a Python script for you automatically, that you can go take your sales data, and I'm sure you could get access to your CRM, and it can predict what your next win is going to be, or what the reason code is for some of your losses. That's not normally an IE thing that we think about, but I think that if we feel like we're typecast, then we are. And if we don't start to use some of these tools to go make cross-departmental impacts where people are like, whoa, who are these guys? That's great. I want to keep using them. That creating that buzz that we're cross-departmental integrators. And I'm not saying you got to be an expert in Python. I'm not saying you got to be an expert but if you can know just a little about some of these things to make an impact, some of this is schoolyard playground, meeting people, shaking their hand, looking them in the eyes, doing what you say you're going to do, helping them out, even though it's not in your mandate, but doing it anyways, or doing it above and beyond.
Yeah.
I think that's going to give longevity and rebranding to some legacy IE groups that might be at risk every 5 year in that cycle, versus adapting to what our organizations need. I like this first piece here, which is, and some of this is biased because I think IE's the best, and we are. So, but how do we move from not taking orders to not waiting for problems to be handed down, but to proactively identify, to own that hoppering process, and to go with confidence, seek it out in the organization, and trust the process, and do what serves the highest good of the organization, independent of some of the political dynamics and what individual leaders want, doing what's best for the organization. being that connective tissue. I like that word, connective tissue, within the organizations. Uh, Scott, I'm going to pause there because I think we've covered it. If we've got some questions. I haven't looked at the question log there.
So you keep, so make
Sure.
sure you finish your storyline. Yeah.
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 I think, if there's three things around, okay, so what do we do? Well, if you can move to a COE, center of excellence mindset, and start to position your organization um, as decentralized value enablers, where we're using technologies, we're using generative AI to attack domains like sales and marketing and HR and IT that maybe we haven't touched before. If you're typecast in manufacturing or ops, or you're only working on cost cutting, it's not don't do those things. It's, can you add some things cross departmentally? Can you change how you're positioned in your organizations as enterprise connective tissue or value enablers? Um, how do we, in the middle here, tie our work directly to strategy of the organization? If you don't know the strategy of the organization, that's a problem. That's the first step. If the organization doesn't have a strategy, that's another problem. Can we help with that? But as strategy deployment experts cross departmentally, I think that our chances of long-term sustained success is way higher. Again, um, you can work on the wrong things and have great intentions. You can on the right things and not be politically astute. And there's a lot of failure modes in how these are architected. Finally, the hedge fund manager uh, concept of how you choose your portfolio and what KPI with the overlapping business cases, how you track your results, and then how you communicate those results to the broader organization starts to become really, really critical. And so I think these are things that you can do right now. You don't have to go into ChatGPT. I mean, you can position your organizations a little differently right now. And I think that's one of the starting points here.
Yeah.
So, Scott, I think with that, any questions or comments? I know we've said a lot and we've showed a lot here, but I hope that respectfully, you guys take this challenge and think about how this can impact your groups or how you deploy industrial engineering practices into your organizations in the future.
Yeah. Well, I think, as I was listening to you, trying to, I was trying to be different people in the audience. In other words, I was trying to be, if I were just an entry level industrial engineer, how would I hear this? How would I experience this? What would it mean to me? If I was Chris Kelling at John Deere, one of our members of CISE, who really leads and manages the industrial engineering function, this is very salient for her, I believe. Our representative at GM or Boeing. So I think you've given everyone, including me, a lot of food for thought. I think you structured this really, really well. I think it's very logical, and I think that when I think back at my 40 years, and just for example, if you go back one slide, whenever I did a consulting project 30 years ago, I would never engage with a client, no matter what I was working on, unless they shared a copy of their strategic plan with me. It's because I understood that no matter what work I'm doing, it could be some little inky dinky project, no matter what I'm doing, I have to understand how it's connected to their strategy. And if I can do that, then I can make sure that my work is positioned and that my work is value and it's the right use of my life's energy, right? So I think there's a lot of gems of wisdom in here, and I think it's going to take people some time to sort of digest this a little bit. But I'd like to do a follow-on with you. Maybe we do a meeting instead of a webinar, and we just, you and I just create a dialogue group, and we open it up and we let people talk about it. We've been doing that with the people community, so I think that would be a good next step. And so thanks, Jared, for taking time to do this. I really enjoyed it. I think you really nailed it. I would just close with this last minute by inviting everybody to come to Atlanta. And if you do, you'll get a chance to see me and meet me. And I'd be glad to meet you, face to face and talk with you. We've got a great set of keynote speakers lined up for. I mean, the keynote speakers, in my opinion, are worth the price of admission. I always walk away thinking, oh my God, these guys have really given me altitude. They've really lifted me up. And then CISE has created, I just jump ahead. On Sunday, we've created literally a workshop that's worth the price of admission. So we've got Kevin Fallon, who's VP of Engineering at UPS, coming to talk about supply chain 4.0 and 5.0. Specifically, he's going to focus on technology accelerators, sort of where have we been, where are we, and where are we going, which is neat. And then I'll be sharing an update on our engineering people and team performance excellence community. And then Thomas Davis, who is also a member of CISE, will be having a workshop. These are 80-minute workshops, 80-minute workshop on healthcare performance excellence. And then that evening, Sunday night, we've got the Capstone Senior Design showcase and leadership mixer with students. And so Sunday, if you just paid for the conference and you came to Sunday, I think you can get your money's worth. So look forward to seeing some of you there. And thank you for taking time today to join us. Thanks again, Jared. And everybody, please stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everybody.